the world is still 23 degrees sideways. So now we get to stop talking about consensus as a broad topic and talk about what I was originally talking about, consensus decision making and the notion of consensus reality. Hopefully after this I'll be able to put this one to bed for a little while, but I really want to challenge some ideas here. Consensus decision making process. It's a thing. It's not a democratic vote. It does not have official hierarchical or tallied systems. It doesn't have a leader. It doesn't have an enforceable rule book. It relies purely on human relations and human dynamics. It is, in effect, made for bullying. It's like it's not a bug, it's a feature, okay? And this is the census decision-making process, okay? I'm not talking about the broad dictionary definition of consensus as a word. So it can be workable in small groups, but it tends even then to become a very heavy power dynamic. And that means bullying, okay? I tried to come up with a minimum number, like where's a safe number? And, somewhere between 2 and 5, except that with 2, you ever been in a relationship? Like a monogamous relationship? Poly relationships no better. I've got plenty of those under my belt, and nope. Consensus with 3 or 5, there's not really a number. Any number over 1, a consensus decision-making process can be a really heavy power dynamic. And it takes a lot of effort. So in a small group, 5 or fewer, 7 or fewer maybe, you could have someone who's very, very aware of their ability to be a bully and very consciously avoids that. But that's almost like that's a bug in the process, because the process is not supposed to be reliant on having superior morals. One person, the most capable person, having superior morals in terms of bullying or self-sacrifice. And I'm not even sure that would be superior morals in terms of self-sacrifice. It might be disadvantageous. The only place I have seen a consensus decision-making process actually function well is in small groups of high-trust professionals with an absolute hierarchical decision-maker, someone who has responsibility. The military is a good example. Some remote construction crews that I've been on is also a good example, or are another good example. Essentially, you have an absolute leader, a ranking officer, a foreman, whatever, job lead, who has the ultimate responsibility for the decision. But in a high-trust environment, that leader and everyone on the team is willing to listen to everyone else, and while it's not universal, it's not uncommon to see some situations resolved in a unanimous consensus that the leader is willing to take responsibility for. For that statement to make sense, you're going to have to actually understand what responsibility actually is and the definition of uncommon. But you have a leader, you have a person who is responsible for the decision, and you develop a consensus because you're in a high trust, high professionalism environment, and people have the awareness to take a look at an idea that might be off the wall from someone else, but is the best path forward, and come to a consensus. It does work. You're talking about stuff in the realm of, a plane crew, we're talking about numbers like 11, 16 people, 7 people. It's not large by any stretch, and there's already there's already a set of orders. So there's a hierarchy above your team. There's already a set of orders, and you have someone who is responsible, but it's very reliant on professionalism and trust. That's the only place I've seen it work, and most of the people that I have trained with in consensus decision-making process classes or seminars don't consider that to be a consensus decision-making process because there is a hierarchy. That's what it is. So, bullying, tyranny against the individual, anti-individualism as a method of making decisions. So when it comes to consensus reality, look, don't get too attached to the notion of objective reality, okay? Objective reality is very close to mythology when you're dealing with human factors. So you can have an objective reality that 1 calorie of energy will raise 1 cc of water 1 degree Celsius at specific conditions at sea level with a certain ambient temperature and a certain water purity and a certain atmospheric density. Objective reality. And that seems to work most of the time. But objective reality outside of humans seems to exist. But that's not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with human factors. So further, I would say that consensus reality, as applied to this non-human factor objective reality, like water temperatures, is still guilty of a lot of forced consensus, meaning attachment, and value judgment. Medicine's a good example. Medicine is an art. It's a humane art. People treat it as a science and it has scientific tools in it, but medicine by nature makes a value judgment. What is healthy, what is not healthy, what's better for the patient, what's worse for the patient, value judgments. And there's a consensus reality in there which is tyrannical. It's a consensus. Where do you stand on assisted suicide? Where do you stand on mandatory suicide for brain death? Where do you stand on abortion? Everything in healthcare, you have a consensus reality, and it's tyrannical. Anyone who disagrees with the consensus or questions the consensus, anyone who goes exploring for a new paradigm is violating the consensus reality. And that can be looked upon very negatively. It usually is looked upon very negatively, and it is defended against assiduously, especially when there are organizations in place, like the AMA, or the American Diabetic Association. So, suspect value judgment in objective reality has been a hindrance to the advancement of many scientific fields since, well, the early Enlightenment or even before. So when dealing with human factors, specifically, we get crazy things, okay, like low-fat, high-carb diets that are still defended against any disagreement by large numbers of professionals. This is a consensus reality. There's a competing reality. It's getting pushed back, but for a very long time, the consensus was strong, okay? Back in the early 70s, Atkins got hauled before Congress and was going to have his book banned and his practice taken away and everything after years and years of success because of the consensus reality. So this stretches to the point where people try to ban books and information that contradicts the enforced tyranny of the so-called consensus. And this is where I'm going with consensus reality as a form of bullying. Okay, you need to know what it is. You need to know how to question it. There are some skills involved. Okay, it's been a long time since I was 15, and I just said, "Screw it all, burn it all down. It's all untrue." But there's a point to that, and there's a point to that questioning. And as you get better at that questioning, well, to lose it. Okay, I'm challenging ideas here, and I'm getting a lot of pushback from people who are very, very attached to ideas, ideologies, programs, essentially programs, okay? Consensus decision-making processes are very heavy and anti-individual. Consensus reality can be very heavy, very, very weighty, very heavy against free thought. And consensus reality with human factors is often evidenced by a certain amount of censorship. So, that's your sideways for today. Sleep well. Oh yeah, market stuff. Subscribe, like, share with your friends, get me some subscribers, make this into a fun conversation. Get me a lot of people who are going to yell at me that I'm wrong. I kind of thrive on it. Whatever it takes.